Well, hello and welcome back to another week's analysis behind the news. And what a week for news it was. According to the Wall Street Journal, there's a missing U.S. missile that decided to show up in Cuba. It says here that an inert U.S. Hellfire missile sent to Europe for training purposes was wrongly shipped from there to Cuba in 2014. Now, the Wall Street Journal actually broke the story on it. However, the New American magazine puts a little bit of some historic context to it. But it also tells you that the missile disappeared after being sent to Europe for a NATO training exercise. And NATO is the North American Treaty Organization, or excuse me, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And it's one of those entangling alliances that the Founding Fathers had warned us against. And this just comes out from that. And the historic context in here, it says, medium range and intermediate range ballistic missiles that the Soviets once deployed in Cuba, thereby triggering the famous Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, had ranges of up to 2,200 miles and carried nuclear warheads. Now, this Hellfire missile, as reported by the Wall Street Journal, has said that that missile was inert, so it was a training one, didn't have any warheads on it or anything of that nature, and the range on it was about 5 miles. But still, it's a missile. It's got U.S. military secrets and stuff to it. And even with the warming of relations between U.S. and Cuba, do we think it's going to come back anytime soon? Because the missile's been over there since March of 2014. And of course, they didn't tell us about it. It was discovered in June when Lockheed Martin, the contractor, discovered that it was gone. So it was rather interesting. But the historical context says, as the crisis, the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, played out over a period of 13 days in October, during which time the U.S. maintained a quarantine around Cuba to inspect all ships approaching the island to verify that they were not carrying offensive weapons, the world held its breath for fear that a war between the United States and the Soviet Union would break out. When the Soviets agreed to remove their ballistic missiles from Cuba, Americans praised President Kennedy for his strong leadership during the crisis. However, they were not aware that Kennedy had secretly agreed to remove all U.S. missiles from southern Italy and Turkey in exchange for the Soviets removing their missiles from Cuba. The U.S. also made a pledge never to invade Cuba, which dashed the hopes of Cuban exiles who thought they might receive U.S. support to return to their homeland someday. It says allowing a U.S. Hellfire missile to get into the hands of the Cubans is certainly a national security fiasco of serious proportions. It says compared to the presence of a nuclear-tipped Soviet missiles in Cuba back in 1962, this latest problem seems minor. And we should also point out that what's not minor, however, is the fact that Congress continues to put its military overseas for basically empire-building purposes, to be the world's policeman, which is something that the founders neither sought for or endorsed. So we should keep that in mind. Our next headline comes from USA Today, where it says, Obama vetoes GOP attempt to repeal Obamacare. And House Speaker Paul Ryan, there's a quote in here from him, it says, it's no surprise that someone named Obama vetoed a bill repealing Obamacare. And he goes on to say, promising a veto override vote that would take this process all the way to the end under the Constitution. So it's rather interesting that they try this now instead of actually doing this 2 or 3 weeks ago when the omnibus bill came forward in order for them to fund. They could have actually defunded Obamacare at that point, but did they have the backbone to do it? Absolutely not. So why would they do it in a separate bill to push it forth when they know that they're basically a house of cards? They don't have nothing to stand on. It's a sand foundation. And so, of course, Obama is going to, repeal this, or veto it. So, again, it's political theater. And speaking of theater, this comes from Michigan. It says, teacher protests shut down more than 50 Detroit schools. It says, protests by teachers at Detroit public schools are growing and shutting down an increasing number of schools. I went through this article. I couldn't quite figure out why were the teachers and students protesting. So I had to dig a little bit deeper into something called the Education Week blog. And it says here that more than 60 Detroit public schools were closed Monday morning as frustrated teachers continued to protest pay and benefit concessions, large class sizes, and Governor Rick Snyder's plan to overhaul the district. It goes on to say that teacher strikes are illegal in Michigan, but union officials in Detroit are expected to meet Tuesday to discuss possible labor action, the Detroit News reports. Well, isn't that just great? It says here, the school system has been under state oversight since March 2009, a period during which the district has lost tens of thousands of students, closed dozens of schools, and struggled with persistent budget deficits. And again, frustrated teachers continue to protest pay and benefit concessions. So it's all about the kids, isn't it? Yeah, exactly. So, well, I guess our stance on that would be, they allow the government to come in and basically run roughshod over their education system, yet where is the competition in the free market that allows there to be quality service with a lower price? You don't see that because we have a monopoly under the government as far as education goes. Washington Post comes in with this headline, "The New Way Police Are Surveilling You, Calculating Your Threat Score." It says, while officers raced to a recent 911 call about a man threatening his girlfriend, a police operator in headquarters, this is in Fresno, California, consulted software that scored the suspect's potential for violence the way a bank might run a credit report. And they have software that they run to for this. It says, as officers respond to calls, the software is called Beware. Beware automatically runs the address. The search returns the names of residents and scans them against a range of publicly available data to generate a color-coded threat level for each person or address, which is green, yellow, or red. Exactly how Beware calculates threat scores is something that its maker, Intrado, considers a trade secret. So it is unclear how much weight is given to a misdemeanor, felony, or threatening comment on Facebook. However, the program flags issues and provides a report to the user. Well, that calls into some serious question the security of your liberties. So, under the Fourth Amendment, you should have protection from all of this. But yet, I would be interested in knowing how much weight is not so much given a misdemeanor or felony, but yet how much weight is given from input or data from organizations such as the Southern Poverty Law Center and the U.S. Department of Justice that has basically called an all-out war against constitutional conservatives. So very, very scary there. Take a look at that. Keep an eye on it. Obviously, there's a lot more to it than that. And our final headline comes from thenewamerican.com again. This one's called Oregon Standoff, Ranchers' Supporters Disagree with Occupation. And it comes from our reporter who is over in the Idaho area, William F. Jasper. And he talks about what is going on basically in the conservative movement right now, with folks actually taking a step back rather than focusing on the actual protesters themselves taking over the federal, or one of the federal buildings in Oregon, which is obviously something that many in the movement, including us, do not agree with. However, as we saw a video with Chris Ann Hall talks about taking back the narrative, when she's exactly right. The narrative shouldn't be so much that these guys, took over the building, which again, something we don't support, and is not a good thing. However, we should be discussing what is the war that the Bureau of Land Management has on these ranchers, and why is it that the federal government has all of this land to begin with. Take a look at the Constitution, and there are prescribed areas of where you can have land as far as the federal government goes. Usually it's 10 square miles, I believe, in the Washington, D.C. area, just for basically the capital, for the running of the federal government. And there are other instances, too, of forts and ports and so on and so forth. But take a look at that and try to take back the narrative regarding the Oregon standoff. And the newamerican.com will actually be following that a lot closer than what you've seen on the news. So take a look at that. And as always, until next week, we'll see you then.